Okay, well, we've got about a minute or two before we start, and I'll just go ahead and go through a little bit of housekeeping. We don't need to keep that anyway, but I'm Jackie Gingrich Cushman. I'm the chair of the Adams Memorial Commission and the president of the Adams Memorial Foundation. And we are so excited because tonight we are kicking off our book club, and we're kicking it off with John Smith, who is the author of a really interesting book. Hopefully, you've read it. If you haven't, you'll hear about it tonight, and then you can go buy it and read it. And it's about Abigail Adams. It's the unexpected Abigail Adams, a woman not apt to be intimidated. And she is a fascinating woman, very, very strong-willed, very smart, very educated. And we will turn and spend a lot of time talking about her. But just to kind of give you some background of who we are as the Adams Memorial Foundation and the commission and what we're focused on. So our mission at the Adams Memorial Commission is to build a memorial to Abigail and John Adams and Louisa Catherine and John Quincy Adams, Henry and Charles, the Adams family. And so um, we were commissioned, we were created by Congress. We are a bipartisan commission, so we're not political at all. We have four presidential appointees. We have four congressmen that are appointed, and then we are waiting for our four senators to be appointed. So we are a congressional commission, and we have made great progress. We now have legislation that's passed out of the Natural Resources Committee in Congress that would reauthorize us, but would more importantly give us a very prominent place for the Adams Memorial. And that would be on the reserve in President's Park South, just south of the White House. So if you're familiar with that area, there is currently a very small, one-story squat building that used to be a refreshment pavilion that is currently abandoned and not being used. So that would be the location of the Adams Memorial. And it's a perfect location because, as y'all probably know, John Adams was the first president to live in the White House, and it's very close to the White House. And there would be a great north-south connection with the White House, the Adams Memorial, the Washington Monument, and then the Jefferson Memorial. So all three first presidents would be located in a nice north-south corridor along with the White House. And so we're working very hard with Congress to get that passed. And then the foundation is a private 501(c)(3). We're easy to find on the web. You probably know where we are since you signed up for this. And we are focused on raising private donations to help fund the memorial, as well as obviously, along with this, have educational programming that talks about the Adams and educates people about what they did, why they were important, and why they're relevant to us today. So that's really what we're going to be talking about tonight with our author. But before we start, I want to talk a little bit about this book because I want to talk about how much I love this book.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
before John and I start talking about the details. But if I don't know if you can tell, but I have almost every page marked. It's crazy. So I've gone through this book and I have highlights. I've got notes written. I've used this book for several different op-eds that I've written. But it's a very well researched book, but it's also very easy to read and to understand and to really get a lot of value out of it. So I am particularly excited about having John on today to talk about this book, and especially because Abigail is such a uniquely interesting person. And when the memorial is completed on President's Park South, it will be this memorial will have the most prominent location for a woman in Washington. So she will be the
Yeah.
first, which is not unusual for Abigail. Uh,
No.
not at all. But she well deserves this honor. I think of her very much their founding mothers and fathers, but as John will tell you, she was also very, very important to John. And without Abigail Adams, there probably would not have been a John Adams that was as influential and important as he was during the Revolutionary War. So, So let's get started. Is that good, John? Are you good to start?
Good to start.
Absolutely. So what we're going to do, just so you know, John and I are going to talk for a little bit, and primarily John's going to talk. I'm going to ask some questions, and then after we're done, after about probably 30 or 40 minutes, then we'll open it up for everyone to ask questions. And we will probably, if it's a relatively small group, we'll just unmute you and let you ask your questions yourself. But you also, if you want, you can feel free to put it in the chat, and we can read those as well. So several different ways to make sure that you can get your questions of John answered. So, but I get to start off, so that's kind of fun. Okay, so John, the first question is always why this book? Why a book about Abigail? And then also why the title? Because it's a very interesting
Yeah,
title.
yeah. Well, thank you, Jackie, very much. Yeah, the book came about, kind of snuck up on me. I had retired about 10 years ago, and I was getting fascinated with the American Revolution period. And I wanted to write a book with a lot of quotes. I was always big on quotes because it's like you're hearing the real person. So, somebody who was alive and very noteworthy during the American Revolution that had a lot of quotes. And so I started looking around, and right about that time, the National Archives opened up something called Founders Online. And I'll tell anybody if they haven't, Scott McKinley's nod his head like, yes, I know that. Yeah. If you haven't been on Founders Online, it's very easy to use, and the quotes and the editorials are just extremely helpful. So I started looking through those. George Washington has a lot of books, but I'd be glad to do one on him on quotes. But of course, Martha burned all of his letters except for a couple that snuck through. Thank you very much, Martha. And then, well, what about Thomas Jefferson? Well, he lived, but he burned. Her name was Martha also. He burned all of their letters because it's very common to do those type of things and to keep your person back then and keep your personal life out of the window. So I started looking around. I thought, well, there's always John Adams, and so I started reading his stuff. And John goes all over the place, and sometimes he just switches off into Latin, writes a few sentences in Latin. I thought, well, maybe I can get something here. Well, actually, Laura Linney, I was thinking on the HBO series, didn't have a lot to say. She mostly just looked at John and nodded. It was a hard job for her, but she loved Abigail. And I thought, well, let me try Abigail. Maybe she did something. I was floored. And that's partly the reason why I say it was unexpected because I did not expect somebody like Abigail Adams to be so dynamic and so good in so many areas that she was. And so I started reading Abigail Adams, very easy to read. I was becoming enamored with her quotes, with her thought processes, how she structured things. And my book had to be Abigail Adams because she's so good. So I forget if what the question was, but I think that was it.
That was good. No, that was good. And then tell us, and also, so what about the title? I love the title
Yeah,
because it's the unexpected. So you kind of explained that, right? The
yeah,
unexpected.
yeah.
You didn't expect her, but a woman not apt to be intimidated. Talk a little bit about that.
When I came across that phrase that she had inserted almost at the last minute into one of her letters, and by the way, when you go to Massachusetts Historical
Mhm.
Society, if you can convince them that you're not on ill will there, they'll let you hold in your hands certain, and of course, um, the popular one is talks about remember the ladies, but I wasn't interested in that one. I was interested in two of them. And one of the two was that quote that you just mentioned. It was so strong and powerful to me and symbolized Abigail that I had to put it on the cover of the book. And what came about was after the fall of New York or Long Island by the British to the Continental Army, people along the coast of the United States were running. If they lived along the coast, they were running inland, emergency running, because they knew that the British were going to be shelling their cities and war was on. So people were running as fast as they could with anything they could carry. John heard of this in Philadelphia, and wrote a letter to Abigail and said, Abigail, if the British come down the street and start to come in your house, fly with the kids to the woods. Meaning, I had to tell my granddaughter this, not fly, but run as fast as you can to the woods. And Abigail read that and she replied back to John, um, surely you forget, I am not apt to be intimidated, you know. And I thought that is such a strong statement. It's so good. Again, talks about Abigail that I had to put that on the cover of the book because that's her.
That is her, and I love that you gave us the deeper look into the correspondence between them that led to this particular phrase. And it reminds us, it's easy to look back. We're about to come up on the 250th, 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. But 250 years ago, John was in Philadelphia serving in the Second Continental Congress. To your point, the war, things were heating up. They already had Lexington and Concord in Massachusetts that was very near their house. So things were heating up very dramatically. And this is a great reminder to us that this all happened, in the area in which they lived. It was personal, it was close, it was real, and she was home with the children and very much in potentially in harm's way and could have been right at any moment they could have been overrun. So I think it's a great reminder to us that they did put themselves in harm's way. It was very personal. They were very real people that not only were trying to figure out how to form this country and how we should be governed, but we're also worried about, how do you make sure you have enough food for the family and how do you make sure the children are safe? So it's this book. So tell me, so you talked about the letters, and you're right. The Massachusetts Historical Society has a great treasure trove of the letters that are available online for anyone that's listening. It's a great resource. You can go there to the Adams papers. Sarah Martin's the editor, and you can put in either phrases or dates or who's writing to whom, and you can search on the letters and see what they actually wrote to one another. But John, tell us about your research process, because I know they were close to 2,000 letters. Tell us about what was surprising about it, what was hard about it, and really, what did you learn, and how did you organize it? Because that's a lot of letters to go through and figure out how do you represent them appropriately.
Well, and some of the letters are in private hands and they've never been released, if you can believe that, over after 200 years. You kind of wonder, what do they say? But and then some letters have been lost and so on and so on. But her handwriting made it so easy. She has this, and being a woman of that period, you had to have certain skills supposedly to find a husband, and good handwriting was one of them, along with a couple other things. And so her handwriting was very easy to follow, but you just had to, and again, not having to go to Boston and live in Boston for 2 months from the comfort of my own room, you can pick up where you left off the day before and just go through it. I use other people's materials to kind of help guide me, but only to the point of, who said this, where, and why. And other than that, I felt like I was carving through a layer of block. But and then I'd have to run to see if that quote that they gave me was a real quote, or if they through Founders Online, and tailor it and make sure it fit in. And it was just a lot of detail work like that. But it's one of those type of things where you hear and you say, if you enjoy your work, it's called not work. And with Abigail, it was easy to do. She was great handwriting and kind of funny, and she was very structured. One section would start off at the top, and you could always guess where the information you're looking for would appear. Sometimes she used the PS at the bottom as the most critical area. I always looked for the PSs first because the most of the stuff I was looking for was in her PS. Oh, by the way, and she was great to work with.
I love that she was great to work with because it sounds like you really almost formed a relationship with her as you
Yeah,
got to know
yeah.
her through her letters and through what she wrote. But tell me, so if people haven't done the research or haven't read your book, which is excellent, then often people at first just think of her as she's John Adams' wife, right? Maybe they know
Right.
her as John Quincy Adams' mother, maybe not. Sometimes they don't put the two together. You never know. She
Yeah.
was both. But tell us now that you've spent time with her, you've read her letters, you've gotten to know her. Tell her how that has framed your understanding of who she is as an independent person and also her own agency and her influence. Tell us about Abigail as her own woman, kind of what you learned from this process.
Well, Abigail, of course, like a lot of people during that period, either grew or they as people and took on more and more and more, or they didn't and had sometimes not good outcomes. Abigail was the type of person who did what you had to do without too much whining. Although some of her letters to John go back and forth, but I don't blame her whatsoever because he wasn't always the easiest guy to work with or other things. And so she she became her life would have been good. They're probably middle class, you'd call them. Her life would have been very good if there was no war, but there wasn't, and they didn't pick that time. But you can answer it with your own energy. And so she not only, when John left, and sometimes he left for months at a time or 10 years at a time in Europe, she not only had to keep the family going and the house and farm thriving or at least surviving, but she also had to do many, many, many other things. And she just took them on. And many of the roles would be men, such as um, renting houses out. And then there's one instance where she rented out John Adams's birth house, which is right next to the house they spent the time in the American Revolution. And I won't give it away, but it's in the book. Um, the guy would not leave. And we get a lot of that stuff in today's world where the people move into the house and you can't get them legally. Sometimes you can't even get them out. And she ran into those type of things on top of managing the house, managing the kids, educating the kids, and all the other list of many, many things. You don't take a vacation on Sundays or holidays. You work all the time. And that's what she did. And she stayed very organized. She was lucky that she had a little bit of money where she could hire some help inside the house or people to take care of the crops, but they didn't last for a long time, just like somebody that I highlight in the book. And so it was an ever-changing field, and she was just it seemed like to me she never got tired, but that's impossible. And then don't forget, at night she had to write long letters to John because she promised she would. And those letters were long. When you think about it, she got up at the crack of dawn, not even sun up yet, and she worked really hard, sometimes all the time. And at night, after the kids went to bed, she sat down and wrote letters and get ready for the next day tomorrow. So it was just, she had a very interesting life. You might say, really, she's one of the most extraordinary of Americans that I know.
So there are a couple of things in your answer I love that is that I want to kind of pull out and talk about. One that you mentioned was, they didn't choose their time, right? They didn't choose. No one does, right? No one chooses when they're born. No one chooses when they live, but they really rose to the time in which they lived. And I think they were both very aware that they would be historic figures. I mean, they both,
Yes.
in terms of keeping the letters and their correspondence and what happened, they were very aware of the precedents. But talk about how you see, what you learned throughout your research and how you could see both she and John in their thought process of what they had to do now. Because I do think this is why this relates, I think, so well today is that, you know, we're as human beings, we're always going through challenges, right? There is no life without challenge. That's what life is. Life is a series of challenges which you have to figure out how to deal with and how to how to get through. But I do think when we reflect back on what they have gone through and how they handled it and rose to the occasion, I think it gives us all personally hope for our time. So just
Yes.
talk a little bit about how they fit into their particular point in time and how that shaped them and how they rose to the occasion.
Well, they knew they were living in a historic time, first of all. And but the catch was they didn't know how this was going to turn out. I mean, we know, but they didn't know. And at any time, the whole thing could have Congress was broke, and the whole thing could have collapsed. And John was lucky, Abigail was lucky that both of them together had basically the same idea of their time in history and what they needed to do and how much it was going to still cost them in terms of family life or their lives or health or so on. And so they uh, were lucky in the fact that they were in agreement with why they're doing it and what they're doing. But my book, I found a few things I had to put in because it makes them real people. And what
Hmm.
I mean by that is they got tired after 3 or 4 years of John occasionally coming home. He goes for long periods of time, sometimes without writing her a letter. Um, and he even got to one point that I put in the book where her letter to him was a little frosty, and he wrote even a more frosty one back to her. For instance, she said, "Well, if you're too busy to answer my letters, please give me off to your secretary." But then, but then he wrote back, and that was a good one. It's like, okay, all holds barred. He was saying, "Well, let me just complain a little bit more about this." And I'm reading it and I go, "Oh, oh, I feel like I shouldn't be listening to this." But they're real people and they get tired of it, and they didn't see any change or any thing that was going to change anything up to that point. And the British had a lot more money and they could hold out longer than the Americans. The Americans were going broke if they weren't broke. And then he he was always John was always balancing his career and career wants with his family and her. And it was coming to the point where they were getting ready to send somebody, probably John, he figured, to Europe to start negotiating deals for when the British surrendered, we'd be ready to go. But the problem was, if Abigail didn't think that he was writing enough when he was in Philadelphia or New York, what's going to happen when he goes to France and ships? And he used that excuse. I use the word excuse. He used that excuse quite a bit that, well, the ship must have sank or things like that. So, what was going to happen to their relationship when he's in Europe and she can't come over? And it was going to go on and on. It didn't look promising, say, but they each, when they needed it, they bolstered each other up, and they played it by ear. There was no long-term plan even for them.
That you're it, and I love that, and it's such a real relationship. You can really see it in the letters. And other thing that you mentioned, we didn't know the outcome, right? From here, it's easy for us to see, right? We
Right.
won the war eventually, and the accomplishments of the Adams are so great. It's not, not just
Yeah.
John and Abigail, but you
Yeah.
have John Quincy who left at a very young age to go with his father overseas.
Yes.
I'm gonna read a little quote from your book. So she was I always think of Abigail. She was kind of like the original Tiger Mom, but she was very tough on John Quincy. I mean, she
Very
was
tough.
very tough on him. She wrote him letters about what he should be doing, right? And he's a very young boy. I think he's probably 11 or 12 at this time. And she writes to him, there are times in which a genius would wish to live. It is not in the still calm of life or the repose of a Pacific station that great characters are formed. Great necessities call out great virtues. So, and there was a different letter, and I think you have it here as well, but where she talks about whether jump off the ship than be, than not do what you're supposed to do for your country and your
Yes.
family. So she was a very, very, tough woman. But speaking of the Adams accomplishments, so you mentioned John going overseas, but he's the one that negotiated, as you mentioned in your book, the loan with the Dutch financier
Yeah.
that allowed us to continue the war. I
Yeah.
mean,
Very understated by people in history, I think.
absolutely. And she talks about that in her letters as well, that people won't understand that this is what actually happened and why this was so important. But, without that money, it's very easy to argue that we wouldn't have been able to fight the war anymore. That had been no more money, we could have
Yeah.
done nothing. And then
Exactly.
she also talked about, um, I love this, that I feel that it's my due for having sacrificed so large a portion of my peace and happiness to promote the welfare of my country, which I hope for many years will come to reap the benefit. So she knew
Yes,
that she and John were sacrificing for the country, but she thought it was worth it.
exactly. And you're when you're talking about her and her relationship with John Quincy, um, it reminds me of a different letter that she had heard from somebody. He was still in Europe, but no, wait, I'm sorry. He had come back over here and he was finishing his work at Harvard, and he heard from the mother of a friend there that he knew he was rich, he knew he was famous, and he's copying quite the attitude. And at the bottom of the letter, she says, "I will not tolerate you if you become a blockhead." And so that was pretty rough for her too, but doing.
I kind of share that sentiment. I have a son as well, and he's no blockhead, so I would not be able to put up with that as well.
Yeah,
Um, so she was, in addition to everything that she did, I want to talk a little bit about her as an entrepreneur because she really is
yeah,
this amazing entrepreneur. I mean, it's interesting because, George Washington, they had money. They were one of the, he's one of the richest people in Virginia, he and his wife. Jefferson clearly he had a huge plantation. He had access to money. But they really, he was the son of he didn't have he went to Harvard on a scholarship. I mean,
yeah,
he was a circuit lawyer. He had to make money.
yeah.
Her family were upper middle class. They didn't just have money lying around waiting for John to go to the Second Continental Congress and spend money. So talk a little bit about what she did to keep the family afloat and how she was really ahead of her times in terms of how women were involved in the economy.
Well, women of the time, of course, the norm was that they stay home, educate the kids the best that they could, and cook and maintain the household for the man wherever he worked in the fields or in a business somewhere to support them. And that's how the new republic was going to get along. But it didn't always work that cleanly. And in John and Abigail's case, it was very much very different. It's like swatting, putting something in a jar and swishing it up and then swatting it and see what comes out. They made it up as they went along. But it's another thing for Abigail that she was willing to take on even more work and learn new skills if it was going to mean a better family life that they had going on. She learned about investments, proper investments. And by the way, the kudos go out to her uncle, Dr. Cotton Tufts, which I always thought that's a cool name. Cotton Tufts. It's a cool name.
It's a great
But
name.
yeah, and he taught Abigail everything she needed to start off in investments. And for a combination of her smarts in taking that information and running with it, and the time that she was doing all this stuff before Alexander Hamilton uh, went ahead and gave her a bunch of money in terms of new legislation and new laws. She was at the right time in the right place for that. For marketing, she realized that there are a lot of things in the United States that women who had some money and some prestige weren't getting. And so she also found out that she could import that stuff using an American flag ship. I don't know how legal that was, but they didn't worry about deals like that. And she would buy and sell, being very savvy, buy and sell stuff that went for a lot of money when they came over to the United States. And John apparently never never learned that because he tried to help out a couple times, and you could just see her swatting her head and say, "Oh no, how am I going to get rid of this stuff?" And then finally, she told John, "You have so much work to do. Let me go ahead and make the deals with the people in Europe, and I'll bring you in on it." So that's her way of handling it. But she also did well, like I had mentioned in investments, but she also was um, she could make mistakes too. And she had one big mistake when she got into the real estate area of buying property in Vermont.
Mm.
And John said, "Don't mess anymore in Vermont." That's all he said about it. But I could tell you what that is because it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, please do.
She had heard that somebody in Boston, two guys were coming through and they were selling property in Vermont up near the Canadian border. And they talked her into thinking that this was going to be a hot thing. You're getting on the ground floor. But you can't, unfortunately, you're a married woman, you have absolutely no rights, and you can't buy this property. And she said, oh, wait a minute. I have the money to buy it. My husband is so out of town. I have 4 kids. And what she did was she bought 5 acres for a fair amount of money. And the way she did it was she put them in everybody's name, in John's name, and her 4 children. But of course, she couldn't buy it, so she did went along with it like that. Come to find out that, and I don't think the property is still sold. I mean, John Quincy Adams really had to get rid of it when it was given to him in his will, you know. So, but that's one thing where she made a big boo-boo. It cost a lot of money. John knew about it, and all he said was he didn't chastise her. All he said was, "Don't meddle anymore in Vermont." So, and she said, "Oh, okay."
But I think
But
she was pretty successful at gathering up property around Quincy and creating a place for him to retire to.
exactly, Peacefield, you know, absolutely.
So yeah, so she was very successful. So talk a little bit about, you mentioned the will, but talk a little bit about how her will was different and potentially illegal from the wills that were around for women of the day.
Um, the first of all, why did she leave a will when she's not supposed to have anything? You know,
Exactly. She's not supposed to have any
that's
property to give to anybody.
exactly. And her will that she made out 2 years before she passed away was not legal for 3 reasons. One is she's a married woman, no rights, no witnesses to witness something that's illegal. And she had decided that her son would be the executor and divide up her unlawful estate built up over decades. And she didn't have the power to make him the executor. And except for a couple items that gave to the sons, the existing sons, John Quincy and Thomas, she bequeathed the will's contents and his fair amount of stuff and very expensive to all 21 of her female granddaughters, daughters-in-law, nieces, friends, and widows, all of whom could not legally accept the stuff in there. And some of them were, you know, uh, shares of stock to bridges and toll roads, and it ran a variety of things that she collected. But it was quite wealthy, and she had wasn't supposed to have that. One quick thing about that will to the John was cleaning out stuff after she passed away, and he found a will. He didn't even know she had a will, let alone had it and gave it up, you know, chopped it up like that. And John would be completely in his rights to look at it, wad the will up, and throw it in the fire. But instead, he took it over to their son Thomas, and both of them, including John most of all, made every single one of the her requests happen. And
Hmm.
so that's what he did. But that was John.
That is so interesting. It shows how much the movement, you know, you talked earlier about them being a partnership, but it showed how much he respected her, right?
Yes,
In her separate
exactly.
opinion. He didn't know she had done this, but he respected that she had done it. He
Yes.
respected her wishes. But talk a little bit about their relationship and how much she influenced him, or how much she, I think in some cases, was really more than just a partner, but someone who was able to bolster him up so he was able to do what he could do.
Whoops, you blanked out in that last
Oh,
sentence
sorry.
there.
But yeah, but a little bit also like how she was able to bolster him during his when he was both
Yeah.
running for president and when he was president.
When he was running for president, their anger, both of them was trying to be kept in control with Alexander Hamilton meddling behind the scenes, and they just. I could go into detail on that, but anyway, Alexander Hamilton was not a good friend of theirs, and she saw that a lot of the newspaper reports, which she saw, I mean, she was in London. She saw what the newspaper was saying about, she called them hellhounds, what the newspapers were saying about John. And she was there and she knows it never happened. And that's where her hatred is a good word for newspapers came about. That she always protected him. And believe me, if he made a mistake or he couldn't see something happening if he didn't watch out, she told him exactly what was going on. He was his best I'd say, prudent ally with anything going on. He always trusted, never questioned anything that Abigail was saying because he knew that where her uh, where her allegiances lie and her love lies. Like the second, I had two quotes that I liked from the book. Of course, we know the one is not apt to be intimidated, but the other one came about. I don't know if this is a good way to for a good time to segue that in.
Sure.
Um, John had just not won the election, lost the election to Thomas Jefferson. By the way, Abigail didn't go to his first thing to take the presidency, and she didn't go to his final thing to the presidency. She was going home for 2 weeks in the meantime. He was packing things up, but just like politicians today, one of the last things that they do is what? They put their own people on the courts, the judges. And they both decided, I don't know if they started or not, but they both decided this is what we need to do. But then she had a lot of stuff and she had to take off and and go back home for 2 weeks. And he realized, well, now the only thing I have left to do is name these judges. But wait a minute, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know the people. She's like a chief of staff. And she left and he had no idea what was doing. He knew how important it was. So he sent a runner and the runner caught up with Abigail and she goes, What? What? And he said, you need to tell me what's going on. So if people ever think that she wasn't actively involved in his presidency, there's one document in her letter that she sends back. And it's almost like and I saw this at Massachusetts Historical Society too. And it's almost like she's saying, and she said, I want to see the list of judges. So she was completely, if you're fooling yourself that she wasn't involved, she knew what she was doing. She is savvy and she took action. And so he was so relieved on that occasion and many, many occasions because he trusted her thing. He called her his ballast. And for nautical people, ballast are these lead pipes that you put in the bottom of a ship so it doesn't capsize, which the whole analogy fits with him.
Oh, I think it definitely does. And you can tell, you mentioned that she wasn't at his inauguration when he became president. She was with his mother who was not doing
Yes.
well, right? So she was staying with his sick mother, and he still sent her letters about, and sent her a letter about, gosh, you need to be here with me. You need to be with me. And I need you here with me.
Yeah,
She clearly tempered him in a lot of ways. First of all, to your point, she had undying loyalty, so he knew that he had, right, someone with him who was loyal to him and someone who was his
yes,
intellectual equal that he could talk to. But she clearly made a huge difference in his day-to-day life and enabled him to be a better person when she was around, which is such a lovely
absolutely.
thing for a couple. It's really nice. As
Yeah, and being married that long too.
I
So,
know. Maybe it's because they were, he was gone for so many years, who knows?
yeah,
So she must have really missed him. So let's talk a little bit. They were one of the few founding families that didn't own slaves, and
yes,
John Quincy was clearly very well known for his anti-slavery work in the House and his overturn of the gag rule, and he constantly fought. He was known as the hellhound of slavery in the Congress. But tell us a little bit about her background, slaveries, and her understanding, and why she was, her views, and how that was so different from that time as well.
yeah. Uh, Abigail grew up in a household run by her Congregationalist minister father, and his wife, her mother, would go every day to serve people of the congregation and do different things for them. They had the Smith household. By the way, her maiden name is Smith, so we know where the intelligence comes from on that. And so the Smith household had, when she was growing up, between 3 to 5 slaves, enslaved people. And you're thinking, no, that can't be true. I mean, why does a Congregationalist minister have slaves? I mean, what's going on? And we've never gotten that answer. It could be that he won or he was given them as payment to a debt. Maybe they needed more help around the house, and maybe he was going to save them and so on. But we don't know the exact number of it. And Abigail, in some of her letters to John when they were dating, she mentions a couple by names, a couple of the slaves, but it's more like the word giddy was thrown around, and she isn't seeing them as people. She's seeing them as, oh, don't give this to Tom because he tears it up and he'll catch the envelope on fire when they thought smallpox was carried on envelopes. And don't do that. But then, she's talking about a human being who's been captured and brought over here. Something happened, I think it's called maturity or something. When she grew up, she became very, very uh, I'm trying to think of the right word would be. She became very sorry for slavery. She couldn't understand why slavery was still going on. Don't forget, it was in all 13 colonies, states, and including New England. They made the slave boats. And it permeated through all of the American uh, issues. And so she couldn't figure out why slavery was still going on in the United States. Publicly, she said, it's isn't it a little strange that you're fighting for the freedom of yourselves when you're denying it so much to other people? That was publicly. Privately, she was known to say in some of her letters that she thinks um, the war and bloodshed is a curse from God because of slavery. And she had very, very strong feelings about slavery. John did too. Both of them, as you mentioned, both of them
Mhm.
by choice did not have slaves, or even if somebody wanted to pay John back for a legal bill and have his slaves come over and tear down the field, he would deny it because you're using slave labor. So both of them were very strong about slavery. And of course, as you mentioned, John Quincy Adams, he devoted his life
Mhm.
in the last part of his life to ending slavery.
Yeah, I mean, he's such an interesting figure. It clearly shaped a great deal by his mother, right? I mean, his father
Right.
was away for a long time. He did travel with his father, but he and his mother, watched the Battle of Bunker Hill
Yeah.
from afar when he was a very young child, I think probably 5 or 6, breed still, but Battle of Bunker Hill. And then he becomes a diplomat, overseas, becomes Secretary of State, president, and then serves in the Congress for 17 years. And then
Yeah.
fought against slavery, but he overlapped with Abraham Lincoln for 3 months. So if you think
Yes.
of the time, the span of his life, it's almost impossible to understand that John Quincy was born, right, a British subject in the colonies, but then lived, right, to be able to serve with Abraham Lincoln in the Congress. It's really, this family had such an enormous impact on our nation.
Enormous. Yes.
Unbelievable. So talk a little bit, Abigail's probably most famous quote is one that I think we hear from the letter, but
Yeah,
you don't often, it's coming, right? But you don't often
I
hear
knew.
a response from John Adams, which I know you're going to tell us, but it's when she's telling John, when they were talking about what form of God, what should they do, she reminds him to remember the ladies. So to talk a little
Yes.
about what she really meant, and then John's kind of response to that.
Uh, yeah, it seems like every generation has their own stamp or their own interpretation of Remember the Ladies. And I think right now it's probably the vote, women getting the vote. It could be anything. But in that time, what she meant was there has to be a law to keep brutal husbands from beating up their wives, which happened. It
Mhm.
wasn't against the law. You could do it. And that was her main thing. That she was, but that part didn't get in there. John, uh, a couple days later, sent her a reply letter back that is kind of disappointing. But you can tell he has a lot on his mind. But he's saying, "Oh no, now you're joining the other ones," and he did this long litany of lists of people that we have to free now and be catering to. And don't you realize I have other things on my mind other than just this? And then he was even more so, John. a few days later, he sent a letter to one of his friends, a man to man, and it wasn't. It's really embarrassing if you're a man, you read it, but I don't think he didn't mean it personally to Abigail, but he just meant in general, the women are going to rise up, and we're going to kill us in our sleep. And so, but yeah, remember the ladies is always, but I look at it, if it keeps Abigail and her words in front of people, then it's good, and it opens up the conversation like we just had.
Absolutely. Not, and she wasn't, I mean, I think my guess is Abigail probably knew he was going to respond. She knew him very well, and she
Yep.
probably had a
Yeah.
pretty good idea, but she also wasn't afraid to bring things up. Like she was still going to make sure that her voice was heard and that she asked the question.
Yeah.
But she also knew that he was, to your point, I mean, this is something I think we mentioned earlier that you look backwards and it seems inevitable that we would become our own country. It was not inevitable. We
No.
could not have, we could not have won in a variety of different ways. But, it looks inevitable and when you look back that the form of government is the one that we have and we were all, but at the time, they were trying to bring these colonies, which were very independent colonies with
Yeah.
very
Oh, totally.
perspectives, very different interests. They were trying to bring them and create this new nation. And, every day they were trying to get one faction to not leave, right? Like, so they were just
Yes.
trying to, how can we possibly, we're not going to be, we've never been a simple nation with one type of person that's here. We've always been a very complex nation. And I think that's also something that speaks to us today that we're
Yes.
but we're not different than we were before. We're bigger, but we're still a very
Yeah.
complex nation that's very interesting, and we always had to figure out how do we work together.
Yeah. And it's those Americans, they look over and say, they've always been like this. And to a certain extent, that's true, but the things change, but it's always, we've stayed together through civil wars and so on. And it's hard. Nobody said it was going to be easy, but we make it through day by day. By the way, you reminded me that after the Remember the Ladies thing, John wrote this letter to his friend. About that same time period, Abigail wrote a complaining letter to Mercy Otis Warren, her best friend, and she was not pleasant. And she did some things that John probably wishes she wouldn't have sent. So both of them were airing their grievances on both sides.
I think there's such a, again, that's one of the reasons I love this family is because they're so they're so real, right? So they, you see
Yeah,
the caring. I mean, you see them talk to one another, send these letters. They're real people. They have real challenges.
yeah,
They had personal losses. They lost children. They had financial,
totally.
financial. She actually gave her children the smallpox, inoculation. So they went through all of this, and they remained a very strong family. And I think it's very easy to argue. I would, that we would not be here as a nation in the way that we were and the time that we were if it were not for the Adams family, both for John and
Yes.
Abigail, and what they sacrificed to make sure that we could become a new nation. So I'm very grateful.
Sacrifice is the good word for it because they would have done quite well in life without that, but they willingly knew what they were getting into and took it on anyway. And so we owe a huge debt to the whole Adams family, and that's where the memorial comes in. I think it's kind of weird that there hasn't been one, but now's the time to do it.
Well, thank you for saying that. Haven't had anyone tell me, which I think is great. Hopefully, no one will tonight. That the Adams family does not deserve a memorial. Everyone agrees that they deserve a memorial, and most people are like, "Oh my gosh, you're right. I didn't realize we don't have one."
Yeah.
They're shocked that we don't have one in Washington. So, we're here to fix that. It's not going to be a fast fix, but it's going to happen, and we're
Mhm.
making great progress. But I'd like to now open it up to the audience and ask if anyone has any questions that they would like to ask. We'd love to have you ask those questions at this time. And maybe Sean or Lauren, if you can just make everyone equal on the screen so we can see who's talking, that would be fantastic.
Hi, my name is Bob Homans. I wanted to ask you, was there any material in her letters where she talked about her relationship with her daughter-in-law, Louisa Catherine?
Yeah,
Because
there are later ones she has, but yeah, and don't forget, she by that time was couching her words a little because she's a widely watched figure. She's couching more of her words than she would have late earlier in life. But yeah, she expresses as much as she feels she can express her the situation between John Quincy and her.
Yeah, because I understand they didn't get along very well. When John Quincy died, um, not long afterwards, she went back to Quincy, and I don't think she ever went back to Washington. She went back to to Quincy. I'm confused. After John Quincy died, apparently she never went back to Quincy again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
I
yeah.
can imagine
Yeah.
for a woman who was raised in Europe. I mean, she was, she was raised in a very different world
Yeah.
from John Quincy. Our next, and just so you know, our book next month is going to be actually about John Quincy Adams. So you can, we
Oh,
talk about
good.
him. Yeah, we're going to have so it's Randall Woods, who's a professor in Arkansas, and he's written a book. Y'all better start reading fast because it's a 700 page book. Your latest. And I was like, yes, it's a very good
Yeah.
book. And he'll be on to talk about John Quincy Adams. But you got to remember, Louisa Catherine was raised in a very different world from Abigail, who grew up in
Yeah.
Massachusetts, who actually worked with
Yeah.
her husbands, who ran the farm. And while she did have help, she could do everything that she needed to be done if she
Yeah.
had to
Absolutely.
versus
Absolutely.
Louisa Catherine, who was raised, very European in a very different world. So if you got to also take that into account that it's, these two worlds that really were so different and how those would have to be integrated. But yeah, so let's we'll talk about John Quincy next time. We do have a question in the chat. This is cute, John. It says, "Can you talk more about Abigail's letters with love? I guess it's Lovell, the Real Housewives of the Revolution." So yes, I love that. That's actually really cute.
Lovell, she said.
Yes.
Yeah. There's a couple of adventures, I call them adventures in the book, where the illegal squatter we talked about, some racial discrimination in the neighborhood about her stable boy and Lovell. And I don't know where to start with Lovell. He was a Massachusetts congressman. That's a shocker. And he um, it's hard to put into words because when you read his letters that and Abigail doesn't remember ever meeting him, and he says they did at least twice, but that's between those two. But for 4 years, he sent her double or triple the number of letters that she sent back to him, and they were so Lovell's letters to her were so dirty. We're in the 21st century, and I couldn't find any of them to talk about tonight. I mean, I put them in the book because they're in a book, but I don't feel comfortable saying it in public. And but this is how smart and how savvy Abigail was. She saw that this guy, he is actually above John, had big input into his pay, and so she was nice to him for as long as she could. Then she'd reel the line back in, let it out again, but he could help her get paid, and they needed the money for being a congressman. And he also uh, knew where he was because John's, after a while, just in Europe, just stopped writing to her because it was useless. And he figures, I can never write enough to her. So he didn't write to her for a year. So she used is probably the right word, Congressman Lovell to get the information and get the support that she needed, but then she'd reel it out again and pull it in. But it had a good ending after 4 years. Do you know that she never told John ever about this? It wasn't really an affair. It was more like he was teasing her, and then she would do what she needed to do to get what she needed, just in terms of that. But she never told John about it, and that came out. I forget how, but um, it's interesting. Yeah, Lovell is was a strange guy.
That's fascinating. And then the next question was, did the Adams have any involvement with the Freemasons?
You
Huh.
know, I don't know about that. I know a lot of legal people do back in that time, or high-ranking people. Does somebody in the
Someone might know here. No one knows. Okay, we'll do a little research. We'll answer
yeah,
in the next month's book
I
club.
don't have any questions, but do we by any chance have an opportunity for introductions? This is a small group, and yet I've never met anyone.
Oh, absolutely. I think that would be great. Let's see if there's any more questions, then we can run around and do a quick introduction. I think that's a great idea. I know I recognize several people on here, and I know we have quite a few Adams family members. So I think that would be really fun as well. So anyway, so yeah, I'll go through and the only challenge is we don't have everyone probably sees a different screen.
Yeah.
So we can't really go around to the right, but we can try to go around as best we can. Obviously, I'm Jackie Cushman. Carl, why don't you go next, and then we'll spin around real quick.
Okay, I'm Carl Adams. I'm so in Silver Spring, Maryland. I am a third cousin that has been verified by genealogists, the DAR and the SAR. I live in Silver Spring. Thank you, Carl Adams. I am a historian and I am a relative, and I'm interested in being involved in the Adams Memorial. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thrilled to have you here. So you're gonna have to just jump in because it's a little challenging to call. So
Well, I could say something.
yes, go
I'm
ahead.
Scott McKinley. I've been fascinated with the Adams family since just before the bicentennial, actually, and a big fan of the Adams Chronicles from that time period,
Yeah. Oh,
uh,
yeah.
and as well as the John Adams series. But the Adams Chronicles, and I hope that if there's going to be a memorial, and we've got the semi-quicentennial with us now, that they'll do another Adams special of some kind for us. That would be nice. It's been 50 years since the Adams Chronicles, but I digress. But I did want to ask one quick question, though, and it's regarding Abigail Adams and her attitude toward her children. Um, just the amount of pressure that she put most famously
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
But
Uh, there's always kind of, if you're a child of the Adams family of John and Abigail, there's certain expectations that you were expected to uphold, and some of them did. I think it really came down the second son they had, Charles, had a very difficult childhood, and I won't go into details about people have their feelings about Charles, but that was a very ugly time, and Abigail was very distraught about it, and John saw it as black and white. But the work with Charles was in particularly pretty rough.
Yeah.
thank you. And I know she continued perhaps some of that with her grandchildren as well. I know
Yeah,
Washington Adams famously um, was left at the Quincy house, or the Braintree house, I guess, when John Quincy was overseas and he had Charles Francis with him. But
yes,
George Washington Adams the elder wasn't the one asked to go over with them.
yeah. George Washington uh, Adams also had a huge problem with all types of substance abuses,
Mhm.
and it's in the book. I touch on it, but
Yeah,
because I don't know, I don't touch too much on Charles because I don't know the real story. But like you say, the expectations of both parents and grandparents weighed heavily on all of them, as it does to a lot of families.
Mhm.
And some of them handle it very well, and some don't.
thank you. I should say that I'm writing a radio play, what they call nowadays an audio drama, about the Adams family in Braintree in 1807. So,
Yes.
doing all of this research, all these questions came up. But
Fascinating. That's great. Yeah,
thank
keep us in the loop on that. That's great. Colleen?
Good evening. My name is Colleen Long, and I am in Marco Island, Florida.
Oh,
And
that's right down the road
yeah,
for me,
where are you, John?
outside of Tampa, between Tampa and Orlando.
Okay. And the sun finally just went down. I am truly just a fan of the American Revolution. I belong to a Society of 25 club where we meet monthly, and each member of the group does a presentation. And it was my first time presenting. And I actually did, it was in February, President's Weekend, and I did a presentation on the relationship between Jefferson and Adams, because that's always
Yes.
been my favorite part of history.
Mhm.
And at the end of my presentation, I said, and it's truly sad that there is no memorial to John Adams
Yeah.
in Washington. And then afterwards, as I was doing a little research, I realized, Jackie, your efforts. And that thrilled me to no end. And I immediately signed up for your newsletter. And that's how I'm on here. So I'm just a fan. I would love to contribute, Jackie, in any way to helping from afar if I can. But I plan to continue to take part in this. This was a wonderful first session, and John, your book sounds great. I will be actually receiving it tomorrow.
Oh,
Oh,
good.
thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you.
it's a really
Hope
great
you
book.
enjoy it.
And we would love to have, obviously we have a website that you've probably found.
Mm-hmm.
We have social
Mm-hmm.
media accounts, so please
Yep, will
follow,
do.
share, and spread the word.
Yep,
And you can forward obviously our newsletters. We should have them coming out this week. You can forward our newsletters to your friends as well. So that's great.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Good.
Thank you.
Sure.
We appreciate it. Tom? Oh, you're muted, so you're gonna have to unmute yourself. Or maybe I can. There we go.
Okay,
Perfect.
we got it. Fantastic. Boy, I didn't expect to do this. Let me see if I can make a long story short. Tom Hillary, I'm actually fifth generation from Cambridge, Massachusetts. Did end up
Oh,
relocating to Las Vegas, Nevada about 17 years ago.
that's the normal thing. Yeah.
Absolutely, Cambridge to Las Vegas, but also could be more natural. I remember growing up thinking to myself, the world wasn't chaotic. It was a little bit too chaotic and not as orderly as it should be. And so I decided to go out and study families that had service and stability and continuity in this world. And I came across, a lot of the Boston families, but specifically the Adamses. And I wanted to learn what they were doing and how they were doing it and why they were doing it. And it's added to
Yeah.
my life immeasurably. My father told me that the American Revolution was the greatest thing that ever happened. I did my research and found out, yeah, I'm pretty sure he was right. Part of my philanthropic efforts right now, I've been working with some of the George Washington societies that are based in Washington. But as you said, there's no statue to John Adams. I think he himself had said at one point that he didn't expect there ever would be a statue to John Adams. As you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
these guys deserve a little more recognition than they're getting. So when I started doing research about Adams memorials, I came across your organization, and here I am. And this has been fascinating today.
Great. Well, thank you so much
Well,
for joining us. Yeah, we really, really appreciate it.
And I hope to be
Jackie,
hearing from you.
Jackie,
Yes.
yeah, John, there's an actual quote in there where John's either saying the truth or kind of fishing for things. Says, they will never do a statue to me, so
Yeah.
yeah, so
We're,
far
we're,
true,
we're
but we'll try to change that.
we're trying to prove him wrong
Yeah.
in this process, and it is for more. And I'm glad, Tom, that you mentioned that the family and the family, the moral is for the family, and I think it's so important, especially in today's time, to understand that our country is built on families. I mean, we
Yeah.
transmit values down on purpose. We think, they were obviously very, very thoughtful about how they raise their children and how they focused on, God, family, and country, probably in the God, country, and family order, to their children, anyway. But so I do think this is a different memorial because it is for the entire family. And part of what we're trying to do
Yeah.
in the foundation is talk about that and the importance of families and the importance of transmitting values down. And we so Lee Hooper put a very cute. Make sure you read the notes and an intro from Lee. They're actually getting ready for dinner, so good for them. I'm glad they joined us. That's really cute. And
Jackie,
yes,
I'm so, I'm sorry if I could just say, I actually love the fact that you're doing the family, because even though all the other presidential monuments are for the president only, it's so appropriate for the Adams to have
Yes.
a family memorial, and I just love that, and it just means so much.
thank you. And I do think it
That's it.
makes it more that it enables people to connect with it better, right? On a personal, right, and from a personal standpoint, because it really does. I mean, they viewed, I think they view this as their work the nation as it was a family project. I mean, John didn't do it by himself. Abigail was there with him, and so was John Quincy Adams. I mean, it was a family project. It was not something that was just done by one person. And so the memorial reflects that. So looks like Bob has his hand up. I'm not sure, Bob, if you meant to do that, and maybe you didn't. But anyway, we're going to wrap up in just a minute, but I do want to I'm going to introduce Doug Jacobs, he's on the last one on camera, and I'm going to introduce him. He's a member of our team, and I'm going to let him talk for a moment about what he does, because he is very, very involved in the memorial process, and he can give you a little update about where we are as well. We're thrilled to have Doug involved with this.
Well, thanks, Jackie. I appreciate it. I really appreciate being a part of this conversation tonight, too. I enjoyed the book very much, Mr. Smith. So thank you so much. I'm Doug Jacobs. I'm calling in from Washington, D.C. Up until I'm a preservation architect, historic preservation architect. And up to just a few months ago, I worked for the National Park Service. And the memorials program was part of my portfolio. When I left, there were 18 active memorial designs or construction efforts. So part of my job was to talk people out of building memorials. But I'm happy to say I'm really in favor of this one. If there were ever, a person and a family worthy of a memorial, it is definitely the Adams. And so I'm so excited to be on the other side of the table, actually working with the foundation, doing everything I can and bringing my experience to help this effort. And really, it is a long process, as Jackie alluded to, and it's already been underway for quite a while. But I think that we have set ourselves up at this point to really make some excellent progress with the bill that is circulating through Congress, with a site actually being designated. Just we're getting ready to rock and roll, and I'm very, very excited about it.
Thank you, Doug. I appreciate it. We're thrilled to have him on board. He brings a lot of knowledge and a lot of connections, and we're just thrilled to have him as part of this process. And so, unless there's any other questions before we wrap up, I'm really excited. I really appreciate y'all joining tonight. I think it was a great conversation. If you haven't read the book, please get it and read it. Like I said, I have turned down all these pages. I've just made notes everywhere. It's one of the easiest books to read, but has an amazing amount of, real information and quotes, and I just really enjoyed it. So thank you, John, so much for being our first author, and we will be back next month with John Quincy Adams, A Man for the Whole People, and I would suggest you order that tonight because it is long. Okay.
Do I have just one second for a final little thing? These are an assembly of things. It's not in any book, but you assemble them and check it as you go through. And this is a list of Abigail's little known facts, and it makes her a little bit more real. She was a strong believer in, I'll try to say this, physiognomy. And that's a pseudoscience where if you study the person's face and eyes, you can read inside their soul. And I thought physiognomy is one that I hadn't thought of. She was about 5 feet tall, or 5'1", with dark brown eyes and hair. She had a phobia about deep, dark water, which I think she described the Atlantic Ocean. And she got her feelings together and crossed the Atlantic Ocean, even though she had a huge phobia on it. She never rode a horse in her life. It was always a four-wheeled cart. She was notoriously optimistic. We talked about missing John's presidential inauguration. She foretold of a civil war between the North and South, which I don't think, how hard is that if you're living during that time? And she changed religion later in life, both of them did, from Congregationalist to Unitarian. Don't ask me the difference. And they also changed political parties late in life, which I wouldn't expected for them, from Federalist to Democratic Republican. She was strong mentally and physically, and we had talked about Louisa Adams. She called anything that Abigail had around the house as Noah's Ark because she had so many animals around. She loved songbirds and dogs, but it's funny, she couldn't figure out cats. They always had cats in the farm, to keep the rats under control. But her big thing in France was Parisian women wouldn't take her into their fold unless she had a cat, and she just couldn't do that because she couldn't figure out cats. They're not loyal. I can't figure out cats. So I had to share those with everybody because those are things you don't read in a regular book. Thank
Yeah,
you.
she is a very fascinating lady. And we just got a cute note from Karen saying she's read a good bit of the book and she's learned a lot. That she's married into
Yeah,
the Adams family and she's thrilled to learn more about them. So
great.
yeah. So anyway, but again, thank you all for joining us tonight. We will be sending out information about the next book club, but really appreciate you being here, and of course, importantly, really appreciate your support for the memorial. Please spread the word, and have a lovely evening. Thank you very much.
Good night.
Thank you,
Thank
Jackie.
you.
Good night.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.